Welcome back to the Literacy Lunch Break. We are joined today by Shanna Bieber, Executive Director of Literacy for the Louisiana Department of Education. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shanna. I am so excited to chat with you about all things literacy, but especially leadership, change, because that can be a big task. And I know you've done some great things in Louisiana with initiatives. But before we jump into all of that, we would love for you to just give our listeners a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to where you are now.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk all things literacy, especially Louisiana literacy, which I hold close to my heart. So I'll start by saying I have been in this. I've wanted to be a teacher since I was little. I was the oldest of 4 children, a mom who was a teacher, so got to go into her classrooms, got to see her with the old school easy grader that she comes with.
Oh my goodness.
And
yes.
So for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a teacher. Got the opportunity to teach in elementary levels, middle school level with most of my years in first grade. And that's kind of where my heart has always fallen. Since then, I've served as a master teacher, a literacy coordinator, an executive master teacher at both a pretty rural school and then our largest school system in Louisiana. And then I moved on to this role as executive director of literacy. And I think the 2 things I'm most passionate about is literacy and coaching. And so this role allows me to do both. I get to coach school system and school leaders around literacy. So you can't get any better than that. And I think the most exciting part of this work is that the impact my team is having, and it's not just felt in Louisiana because some of our resources are even being used in other states across the nation.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, listening to you and your experience, I think that is so important and impactful when you are leading. And I love that you just said, leadership, but coaching as well. And that's so critical to support educators. So as we think about that, Louisiana has implemented several statewide initiatives to enhance literacy instruction. Could you highlight some key initiatives and their impact on elementary education?
Yeah, of course. Lots of initiatives, lots of things to share, but I'll focus on just a couple things.
Great.
So to start, just to set a little context, Dr. Brumley, our state superintendent, came in the height of the pandemic. And so one of his top priorities to set for the state was around literacy. He has been our champion for this work. And so where there wasn't previously a literacy team here at the department, he charged his deputy superintendent to create a team. And so that was when Dr. Chasson hired me on, and we have created a team together to lead this work. So the first thing we needed to do in order to be able to show that this is working was to conduct a little pilot, which was quite interesting because that happened in the 2021 school year.
Yeah.
So we had 15 schools where we placed literacy coaches. We had a little funding from state legislation, and we were able to place 15 literacy coaches in our 15 schools across the state. And so we worked alongside of those 15 schools. We looked at instruction. We looked at intervention. We set goals. And we used this particular pilot to help develop not just our mission, but our 4 key literacy pillars. So it led to our statewide Louisiana mission, which was that all Louisiana students can have improved outcomes through high quality instruction and interactions by an effective teacher who is supported by their leaders and families. And then I mentioned those 4 key pillars. And those 4 key pillars that were developed from that pilot was ensuring and focusing around setting and monitoring literacy goals, providing students with high quality instruction in both core and interventions and extensions, growing our teachers and leaders through professional learning, and engaging our families in their children's literacy development at all ages and stages. And so those were developed over 3 years ago now, but they still stand true and they're still driving our current strategy. And we've yet to come up with anything that doesn't fall within one of those 4 key pillars, which is exciting. So then we had to take it statewide. And so the first thing we had to do was start by just bringing awareness to the importance of early literacy and the lasting impacts that it has, not just on a child's school journey, but also throughout their life.
Mhm.
And so we had some systems, we had some balanced literacy work that was happening. And here we
Yeah.
were saying we're shifting to structured literacy.
Yes.
And here's the results that were yielded from this pilot with this shift. And so we worked alongside of our early literacy commission and our legislators to bring like a set of literacy policies that would drive those literacy actions and ensure that they were grounded in the science of reading. So one significant piece of legislation that really started all of this work was ensuring that our K-3 teachers and leaders, we thought it was incredibly important to include our leaders in this training, but that they were all trained in the science of reading.
Right.
And so over the last 3 years, all of our teachers and leaders have been engaged in that training. But then we also recognized that we couldn't just put them through a training. We had to be explicit on how that new learning connected to their high quality instructional materials that our teachers had access to across the state. Louisiana has been well known for the last decade in really highlighting high quality instructional materials. So we needed to be explicit in, and still need to be explicit in, how that training and the data that you're gathering from your literacy screeners and your assessments helps to drive the actions that are happening within those high quality instructional materials. And so that's really where our leaders came into play also, because they're helping drive this work in their schools. And so the other big piece of our strategy has been built around building capacity of our school system leaders and our school leaders. And so we've been working to equip them with that knowledge to make those informed decisions around literacy instruction. We've also focused heavily on literacy interventions, because in some schools, they may not have been happening at all. And in some schools, maybe interventions were being built into the schedules, but they weren't necessarily intentional, or they weren't instructionally coherent with their core materials. And so we've had a huge focus on training our educators on both like the quality of core instruction and interventions.
Yeah. I mean, that is a lot. and
a small part, a small portion of
that's a tiny piece, but so many pieces that I'm listening to you speak. And I think it's really impactful and important. And that's why I'm so excited about this series, is because there are so many layers of change, and even not change, but making sure and ensuring that we are effective in our teaching. And that can't just be in one lane or one component, right? We can't just say, okay, all the teachers are getting trained. You talked about that importance of the professional learning for teachers and leaders.
Correct.
Just even starting small and being informed in decision making. I think, I'm just listening, especially at that state level, of starting with a pilot. So then when you do come across, because we know there's always going to be challenges. And you mentioned, we had, of course, statewide, you're going to have a lot of different things occurring for literacy instruction, but you may have some of that balanced literacy. And how do we start to have a respectful conversation? And really, I think that's an important piece, is having respectful conversations and helping educators understand why these shifts are being made, not just because we tell you to, but we're showing you the data, or we're, helping you see why this is so impactful.
Yeah. And having that student data, I think, just really made the biggest difference. Because one thing I didn't say was the 15 schools that were chosen were some of our most striving schools. And so they had our lowest literacy rates. And so we showed that this was working for all students, those who were struggling as well.
I love that you chose schools that really, highlighted this is possible, because I think that's something that needs to be part of the conversation more than it often is that we provide the instruction that students need, evidence-based instruction, and all students are going to grow from that, right? Yeah. So we know that, 95% plus students can become proficient readers, but yet I always say, when we look at our nation's scores and we see the 34%, why do we accept this as a nation? Why do we allow this to occur? And so again, this is why I'm so excited about this series, is because it does have to start. We have to have that strong leadership that understands that importance starting here. And then what do we need to build to create, not just we're making a change, but we're supporting that change. We're providing the knowledge and we're providing the experience. You said we're not just giving professional learning. We're not
Correct.
just saying, oh, here you go. You had a PD session, but we're helping you understand how that connects to what you have in your classroom and what you're doing in your classroom. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. How do you make that connection? Because, I'm a former building administrator and, I remember trying to figure out the calendar and trying to pop in those professional learning. And oftentimes it was this kind of one and done and, check it off the list. And it wasn't really meaningful and it wasn't really impactful. So when we do have the time that it's already hard to find time for professional
Right,
learning,
right.
how do you then ensure that it is connected for teachers?
Yeah. So I
And
think,
leaders?
that was also part of our strategy. And in order to promote that sustainable change, you have to build that teacher and leader capacity through professional learning structures. So we had to put some structures in place. And this is really a strategy across the entire department, not just in literacy, but across all content areas. But having those professional learning structures in place ensures the opportunity to build educator capacity. And so we focused on two main structures: instructional leadership teams and teacher collaboration. So instructional leadership teams is just how they say, it's your instructional leadership team on your campus. It could be your principals, your assistant principals, any instructional coaches, your literacy coaches. It could be some of your grade level mentors that you have on campus. And so they come together often to discuss what is happening and to drive those actions that are in their literacy plans. And so they're setting those school-wide goals. They're tackling any of their challenges together. So they're coming together as a team. And sometimes it's to do new learning for themselves. So they're diving into their high quality instructional materials so that when they're supporting their teachers, they're providing observations and feedback, that they have the knowledge themselves in order to really promote those high quality, best evidence-based literacy practices. And then the other structure I mentioned was around teacher collaboration. So time during the day, at least once a week, that the teachers of whether they're like grade level or they're content similar teachers, they come together to collaborate, learn together, and plan for effective instruction using those high quality instructional materials, while also considering their students' individual needs, oftentimes based off of those literacy screeners. We now have a statewide literacy screener, and looking at those curriculum embedded assessments in order to plan for adjustments and to consider what are those just-in-time supports that are needed to meet their students' needs.
Yeah, and giving teachers time during the day is, it's what we have to do, right? I mean, because trying to find the time before or after, it's just such a challenge. But finding the time for teachers during the day, I know, is a challenge as well. So does that look different across the state of how the time, or is there some kind of structure that is designed to ensure? Because I'm just thinking back to we always wanted to do that, but that was so hard to do. So how do you find the time for that?
Yeah. And so some of that has just been through what we call our staffing and scheduling guidance. And that, again, is a statewide guidance. I don't want it to sound like it's just a literacy thing here.
Right.
And so there's guidance around making that sacred time. And so when you're developing your schedule, you're figuring out how to bring groups of teachers together. So like I said, it could be all your first grade teachers together. It could be your third, fourth, and fifth grade ELA teachers together. But making that a priority, because we all know when we talk to school leaders and we talk about what's happening in classrooms, when you get down to the root cause of why a lesson may not have gone the way that you wanted it to go, a lot of times it comes down to the planning.
Right.
And so, or the content knowledge. Sometimes teachers are scared of a certain piece of the lesson because they're not 100% comfortable with it.
Absolutely.
And so they skip it. And so these are the opportunities, the times to come together, to learn about that together, to look at our student data. Where do we see our gaps? And then where in our curricula do we need to make sure we're really highlighting? And then our teachers feel confident to go in and provide that high quality core instruction. Because you mentioned before, our data shows we have a lot of class-wide struggles. And so we need to improve that core instruction so that it's not so daunting when you only have, you just want your 10% of kids or your 20% of kids are intervening, where instead of on the flip side, 80%. And so that heavy emphasis on using that teacher collaboration time and making it sacred. We're not canceling this. This is time for us to come together and build our capacity so that we can best support our students.
Yeah, it's so impactful. And again, I just love, as I'm listening, just you're talking about knowledge building. You're talking about using data to inform instruction. And I think we say that so often, oh yes, data is to inform instruction. And then we just kind of assess often, universal screeners. Okay, these kids are red, these kids are yellow, these kids are green. All right, and off we go, to where it's, no, if we're taking the time to assess, we really need to be using that data to drive instruction. And that universal screener might be, that's your kind of, I always say, your check engine light. Yes. And then we might need to be digging down a little bit deeper and finding more information out about certain students and certain student needs. So to provide teachers with that time to have that collaborative conversation, to talk about the data, to problem solve together and really have a community. It sounds like a community of learning. And something that popped into my mind when I was listening to you speak is vulnerability, right? You said, yes. There might be parts of a lesson that teachers don't feel comfortable teaching, right? Especially if I've taught this way for so long. And, when we start to dig into the science of reading, there's a lot of linguistic components of that we, didn't learn or didn't know. And so that is something that is like, I remember becoming a reading specialist and being like, reading through my curriculum and being like, oh my goodness, I never knew this, right? So speaking to that vulnerability, is that something that you find just is possible through just this kind of, this is the community of practice. This is who we are. We're constantly learning. We're constantly working together.
Yeah. The cliche saying of when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
But it's being willing to say, we are asking you to make a fundamental shift in the way that you're teaching students how to read. And I will say too, people like to say, oh, our literacy expert here at the department. I'm like, no, don't call me the literacy expert, because there are definitely experts out there that know a whole lot more than me. But I'm just as guilty in that when I had my first grade classroom, I was taught, those sight words, and you flash those sight words till they're memorized, and then you wonder why they can't apply them in the next time they see them off of when it's not on the little index card. But it's also a part of, and I always highlight my team in this work that we're doing. We're alongside of our leaders and teachers.
Yes.
We're always in the field, learning from them as well as helping them to learn. And so a lot of times we really focus on listening to our educators. What are their challenges? And then we either create the resources for them in some cases. We kept hearing, we keep seeing all this stuff about sound walls in our trainings, but where can we find one? We built a sound wall so that they have access to a sound wall that they can print and put up and display in their classes and utilize during instruction. We've created content literacy series and ACT prep series and LIFT, which is our intervention resources. And so as we've heard from them materials they've needed, we've helped to create those resources, or we've created those professional learning opportunities for them through webinars, recordings, our regional tours that we go on during the summer. And we train teachers, we get them the resources they need. And then sometimes us being in the field isn't necessarily, it's hearing their challenges and then we're coming up with solutions. It's also seeing like what the data shows. And so in some cases, and I'm going to go ahead and use Heggerty as an example, where we saw across our data that our phonological phonemic awareness data was not needed to be where it was at. And we know that was a core piece of students' knowledge in order to become fluent readers. And so we recognized that not only could they use the additional resources around that, they needed the training around that too.
Yes.
And the training that happened around receiving those materials also taught teachers how to, you'd be surprised at how many teachers don't understand what really phoneme segmentation is.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Or the power of blending when you're reading a word. And so
Yeah.
being very explicit and giving them that training also equipped them not just with the materials, but the knowledge on how to use those materials and the knowledge on how to use them with any material.
Yes.
And how they can drive that through, whether that was whole group instruction or small group instruction for intervention purposes.
Yeah. And I love that because, materials are so critical. So yes, we need the resources. We can't say you need to teach this way and then not provide that. And I love that, you're providing either the curriculum or you're creating the resources. But that doesn't work if we're not giving teachers the knowledge, because no classroom looks the same. No school year looks the same. And so we know what we need to teach, but we have to be able to be flexible and adjust as needed.
Correct.
I could talk to you forever, but we like to try to keep these nice and short. But I do want to just ask one more question before we end our time. I always just like to say, this is a lot of information. You talked about this transition. You're on year 3. I think you said 3 years ago, or maybe.
Yeah. Well, we're going on year 4 now. So
year 4.
exciting,
So
yes.
3 years down, moving into year 4. And there's still work happening. So we know it's not a light switch, but we do need to do this with a sense of urgency. But if I'm a leader and I'm a teacher and I'm recognizing there needs to be change and we need to start to make these shifts, if there was one thing that they could walk away with today, what's the one takeaway that you would want listeners to walk away with? I know that's such a hard question.
The one thing I think that has really made the impact in taking on any possible challenges that we've come across is, and I've kind of talked a little bit about this, is becoming an agency of support. So we are a team of support. I think a lot of people view state agencies as, compliance, mandates, policy.
Yes.
And we have all those things. We have policy that is driving these literacy actions. But it's the support in the field that is helping to move the needle. And so I think we laugh because we get invited all the time. And that hasn't always been the case. In the past, people, State Department's coming in.
Right.
Everybody change what you're doing, type
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
But we have system leaders who are saying, come with us. Like, we're stuck.
Yeah.
We can't figure out what we're missing. And so we go do walkthroughs with them. We look at their literacy plans. We talk about the data. We talk about what the plans are to build the capacity of their teachers and leaders. And I think it's the approach that we have taken alongside of our literacy leaders across the state. And I think that's made all the difference.
Absolutely.
Of course, I wish, everything would change overnight. And that's been a big shift for me personally, because as a teacher, you make a shift and you see those changes immediately. And so, I had to learn that it takes a little longer to
big systems, it takes a lot longer.
Yes, to steer that entire big giant ship of ours that we're trying to, change course in. But we're excited in Louisiana. We are seeing growth. We saw growth in our NAEP scores. We're seeing growth in our literacy screener results, our state assessments. And so we're excited about where we're going and where we're headed for Louisiana kids. And I tell my team and I tell my educators all the time that they are everything that Louisiana students and their families have wished for. And I see a huge change in the approach and just the emphasis on the importance of not just early literacy. My team supports birth through grade 12, and I'll say and beyond, because we've done a lot of work with higher ed as well. And so just really excited to lead this work and alongside of my incredible team. And I'm so proud of the work that our Louisiana educators are making, that they're doing, and the progress that they're making that we're seeing in Louisiana students. So really honored to do this work, and I can't think of anything better to do.
Absolutely amazing. And I thank you so much for sharing the journey and the work that you're doing, because it is such an honor. It's so impactful. And I'm so grateful that our listeners get to hear from you, to learn from you and your team. And I just want to thank you for the amazing work that you and your team are doing, because this is what it's all about, and to see the change, to see it work, to see that growth is what we need to highlight, we need to share so that change can continue.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with
Thank
us.
you for having me. And if, anybody ever wants to collaborate alongside of us, we love to
Love that.
collaborate with others as well. And, I'm just thankful that I have a state superintendent who has allowed us to do this work as well. And that's been important too. So we're always excited to collaborate with others and keep talking about literacy.
Love that. Love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we explore literacy topics in a snack-sized, easily digestible format.